Thank you for tuning into our podcast on everything to do with belief systems. I'm Steve Frederick and I'm joined with three wonderful friends, Jordan Johan, Mohammed Fazil, and Rakesh Kumar. So, like I mentioned earlier, today's discussion is going to be on the topic of belief systems, what they are, why they affect us, and our interaction so much, and how it does that. Today, we're going to talk about not just that, but also something that's more deeper, something that's about self concept and confirmation bias and how that influences our thoughts. We're going to also talk about how to deconstruct a personal belief systems and why our shared belief systems manifest in different communities and societies that have different traditions from each other. So let's get started with the first question of today, which is what is belief systems? Anybody want to answer that question willingly first, and then we can move on to the rest in order. Mhm.
Right. So
Yeah.
I believe that belief systems are the set of personal, individual, foundational principles that help us to make sense of our everyday reality. They influence our decisions and help us form opinions on matters, say, identity, religion, or politics. And I think that is what compromises my definition of a belief system.
So it's a very functional view of belief systems in the sense that what do they achieve in affecting politics and stuff like that. That's your definition of belief system, is it?
Mhm.
Okay. Rakesh, I think you might have a different viewpoint because you're known to have a bit of a different viewpoint on belief systems. What do you think about
Yeah, I
that?
define belief systems as a set of elements that connect together in a congruent sense that affects one's ability to perceive things. And these belief systems are generally shared over a community. And I like to characterize them as mental representations rather than describe them in just in terms of their function or their cause. So
Right.
you can think of a belief system as an attitude towards a proposition. So,
Oh.
in that
Mhm.
sense, belief systems simply affect the way you see things. They form the foundation behind the way that you see things.
Like a tinted glass, which does
Exactly.
have its own function, but again, it's part of your being when that affects whatever you see in a certain way, right?
Mm, right.
Mm-hmm.
And well, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily have to be tinted, but in most circumstances, yes, it is tinted.
Right.
But then it is possible to see reality for what it is. But in general, I'd say that belief system is something that affects the way you take in things, the way you make sense of the world.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I make sense of the world and whatever you just said through my own set of belief systems, which is kind of ironic. Jolene, you have something else to say, or you want to add on to what both of them said?
I mean, yeah, I echo the same opinion as Fazil. I also have a very functional opinion on belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, how they say our flesh is the physical manifestation of our soul.
Mm-hmm.
So, the same way I see belief systems as the manifestation of our attitudes and our behaviors. So,
Ooh,
just like
okay.
how we have a skeleton of bones in our
Mm-hmm.
body, the same way, like you can say the skeleton or framework of our spirit or soul is our belief system.
Right. So it's more
Right.
like a framework of thought on based on which
Yeah.
you're going to navigate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Right.
Well, that's three different definitions, but also what the last one is kind of more aligned with the functional viewpoint, but also gives you a beautiful view of thinking about belief systems as a framework or a network of thoughts, which you can navigate to make a coherent framework of logic. Yeah, so that's the definition of belief systems. You can take a functional viewpoint to it, in the sense that belief systems are something that achieve something else, which is more external and which is more manifested. Or you can take a more it is there belief definition of belief system, that is, it is this way and this is what it does. A definition which is what Rakesh gave us, and what Jordan gave us is kind of an amalgam of both, which like, and also he provided a beautiful example. So that would like all round the question about what belief systems is. It's basically something that's inherent to yourself and that's mutually coherent between its different parts. And also it also affects everything that you do and everything that you say in a certain way. and can help you understand reality or do the exact opposite. So that's what belief systems is summarized. And now we can move on to the next subtopic of today.
Yeah, so now that we're all done with the definition of belief systems, I think we all have about a similar definition for the same. We'll be talking about how belief systems are formed and why are they so innate to our personality or decision making. I'd like to hear if anybody here has any opinion on the same. Why do you think belief systems are formed?
Okay, firstly, when we say belief systems are formed, usually assume that it's something that's just like formed immediately, but it's something that's formed over time. And to understand how it's formed over time, you'll have to, we can compare it to the image of a tree, for example, a belief system. I'm drawing this imagery because I want to differentiate between core belief systems and supplementary belief systems. So you may imagine the roots of a tree as core belief systems and the branches and the leaves as supplementary belief systems. The core belief systems are formed at a very young age as you grow up and also in your teen years. And these core belief systems generally tend to crystallize around the time you're an adult. And the supplementary belief systems, that's the leaves and the branches. I mean, you all know that leaves fall off trees as seasons change. In the same way, supplementary belief systems can change over time as well. And as long as these core belief systems remain, the supplementary belief systems can reorient themselves to maintain an equilibrium. So in the formation of these belief systems, you can think of it as this. Core belief systems are formed at a very young age as you grow, and these are mostly formed from what you accept from what others tell you. And supplementary belief systems are formed again from what others tell you and through your own deductions, inferences, and your own experiences. So yeah, that's how I think belief systems are formed.
That's a very good explanation. I think rather than an interpretation, that is completely true. And it was a very beautiful imagery. From this, you can consider that belief systems are an ever-evolving, a continuous process of formation, and how to differentiate between core and developing belief systems throughout your age. Steve, do you have any thoughts on the same?
I have a lot of thoughts on the same, actually. I think for us, one thing that is belief systems, you can have only one way that's formed, and or multiple ways that are formed, but all of them were talked about by Rakesh. So all I can do is give another perspective on it, which is useful because I'm going to classify belief systems in two as well, but not the same way Rakesh did. I'm going to talk about how they actually are formed, which is exactly the question. So I'm going to say belief systems are generally formed in two ways. One is something that is sensory, something that is from our experience, something that's external, and we observe what happens in our surroundings, and we use these stimuli, and that forms our belief systems in a certain way. These sets of beliefs are what are the reason why we suddenly change if we undergo something that's extremely traumatic to us, because this comes under and this is influenced by something that's external, something that's not really in your control. And if you're put through something that you absolutely do not like, then you're going to end up having a dislike for that thing as part of your belief system if it's traumatic enough. So that's one way. That's one part of it. And the second part of different belief systems is belief systems that are formed from your core, from exactly what Rakesh said. But from where does it happen? It happens from our parents, but it's not external. It's something that you can really control, in the sense that assume your parents give you the ability to have food and take a bath on yourself. They do not tell you that the philosophical ideas behind it. They don't explain exactly what a bath does to you. They just say it's good to you. It's up to you to develop yourself into a belief system that actually explains why this is good for you, how you justify the fact that you have to take a bath every day for yourself. That's something that you do to yourself. That's not actually it's not completely independent of your thinking. Whereas the one that I said earlier, which is from your inferences, that is actually independent of whatever you think it is. Both of them are not exact lines. The line between dividing them is blurry. And most of it lies in that gray area in between. But you can actually divide them in this kind of broad areas. So this is actually how belief systems are formed. You can divide it in two ways. You can say one is completely influenced by the outside stimuli, and the other is actually something that you do to yourself. You can use these outside stimuli, but you have to justify them for yourself, and so you form your own beliefs. And these are the two places how beliefs are formed. That's how I would interpret the formation of belief systems.
Well, I think that's a perfectly good perspective, actually. That serves as an explanation as well. I think your explanation gets why belief systems can be different and vary from individual to individual, and how it talks about accumulating experiences as we grow up. Our tendencies all are, say, somewhat inherited from our surroundings and parents. And I think that plays a major role in why our belief systems are so unique. Jolin, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, honestly, everything was covered by Steve and Rakesh very picturesquely and comprehensive as well. And I pretty much echo the same when it comes to the formation of belief systems. So mainly it's your environment, your experiences, and the atmosphere, especially when you're young and when your brain is essentially plastic, you're influenced and sort of forced by the people around you and your experiences to like line your thoughts in a certain way and to look at life through a particular lens. So basically, mainly it is your atmosphere that shapes the belief system. And I'd also like to add something that I came across when I researched is that there was a certain study that showed that even genetics also plays a role in building a belief system and the spread of belief systems, and that can account for almost 50% of inheritance. So sometimes when there's a newborn baby, parents they look if their child has the same eyes as the mother or the same nose as the father, but what goes unnoticed and what's underlying is that even their moral characteristics and their beliefs are also sometimes inherited. So there's also a genetic factor that plays a role in the formation of belief systems as well. So I just want to add that too.
That's a very interesting notion. Maybe belief systems are more genetically hereditary than we think. And that sure is very interesting. I think all four of us here echo the same opinion regarding to how belief systems are formed. And I think we can move on to more important topics.
We talked about how belief systems are formed through our own experience, inferences, and deductions, and also through what we accept as truth from external sources. Jolin also gives a unique perspective into the role of genetics in shaping our belief systems. The next obvious progression to this line of thought would be to explore the idea of self-concept, and that will be the next topic, self-concept. So Fazil, would you like to elaborate on what you think self-concept means?
So what is self-concept and how does it work? A self-concept is this urge to rationalize our actions and beliefs with social norms. And this ensures that we have a consistent, a non-deconstructible, and rigid outlook. As I've mentioned, we obsess over having a consistent belief system, one that is rational in all matters and provides reasonable enough and morally correct opinions for whatever the issue may be. Think of it as an input and output system, where you get a product belief based on the input data that is processed by your belief system. This sets coherent model codes to abide by, and thus we follow this idealistic model pathway that we've laid out for ourselves. I think that is what self-concept is really about. It is something that you set for yourself and something that you try to abide by. It is like this idealistic version of yourself.
So do you think this self-concept something that you believe about yourself to be true, do you think it's always congruent with reality? Or is there a possibility that it may be incongruent? If so, what are the effects of incongruence between reality and what you believe about yourself to be true? Steve, would you like to answer that question?
I definitely like to answer that question because, by definition, that question is slightly controversial. But to me, since I was asked this question, to me it's a very direct answer. Obviously not. That's the definition of belief, isn't it? Belief is something that's mostly subjective, and as a result, if it's a belief system about self-concept, obviously it's bound to be subjective to a certain extent, and it is, as far as I'm concerned. And the reason I say this is because you can see the obvious results of this incongruency between reality and what a person thinks about themselves. You can see people who have achieved a lot in their uh, in whatever they do, but they fail to recognize it, or they don't want the to be the reason to be happy for it. It's something that is innate to them. They don't want to be not happy for whatever they've done. It's just that they're not, and they don't wish to be recognized. Um, that is something that they think about themselves, which is incongruent to reality, because they do deserve to be recognized for whatever amount of effort they've put in. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you do see people who blow themselves up way higher than whatever they actually may be worth. They may have done something that's like a grain of salt, but they want to blow it up to something much, much bigger. And that's also an example of when people are incongruent to reality. And you can see these effects very widely. And in most cases, to us, it really doesn't matter. Mostly, it just that person just comes off as weird. But it can have really bad effects when put in certain circumstances. Because when a person is out of touch in reality, in any issue, that's something that's not good. But when it comes to their conception of themselves, the way they perceive themselves, and even that is outside that even that does not conform to reality, that really brings a lot of problems to the table, right? Because everything that you do socially, anything that's out, that any interaction that's beside you, is all dependent on how you interact with yourself. And when that's out of line with reality, everything else is going to be as well. And so, even if I am not able to say exactly what the biggest issues might be caused by this incongruency, because it's very specific and the examples would have to be very detailed. I will tell you, there's a lot of potential for things to go wrong when your self-perception of yourself is outside of line of reality. So yeah, I think it's definitely possible that people do not align themselves with reality in terms of their self-concept, and that will definitely have bigger problems in terms of self-conception and also the way they interact with the rest of society.
Yes, I definitely agree with you, Steve. I also like the two extreme examples that you gave to show how it can be extreme and the effects that it can have in social situations, especially when it doesn't really tally with what's real. It can have adverse effects. But what if this person that has a self-concept that is incongruent with reality? What if they're exposed to reality? Are they likely to change their beliefs easily, or are they likely to cling on to their core values simply because those things are their core values and those things define them? Would you like to answer this question, Jolene?
Yeah, so this question, to answer that, is very connected to what Steve had mentioned previously. So he gave a really apprehensive insight into that kind of disconnect between reality and perception. And as you mentioned, when they are met with the reality and when they have to face it, they experience this kind of cognitive dissonance. And this dissonance has a lot of dimensions. And one particular dimension is confirmation bias. So what confirmation bias is, it's this kind of phenomenon where when you're met suddenly with this new information, or you suddenly encounter this untrodden path, your mind kind of tries to align itself with its own beliefs. It interprets this new thing to justify its own belief systems. An easier way to picturize this is thinking of the very well-known debate between your head and your heart, which is a common trope in many romance and film novels. The brain knows that a particular thing is wrong, but your heart's desires are different and tries to justify that wrong thing into something that isn't so bad when you think about it. And that is the essence of confirmation bias. And Steve also saw a common ground between self-concept that Fazil explained and confirmation bias, and how they cause psychological complexes like inferiority or superiority. So confirmation bias basically distorts your own self-concept sometimes. It may cause someone to think of themselves higher than they should, or and that they're entitled to certain things, or they can also cause someone to undermine themselves and scrutinize themselves. And this is a very common thing that we see with teenagers, especially like us, and how Steve mentioned the two extremes, or you can be on either pole or a mix of both as well. So that is how I would see confirmation bias.
Thanks for that explanation, Jolin. That, yeah, confirmation bias, that really explains why people tend to hold on to their core values and not change when they're exposed to reality. But I'd like to offer another extreme to this scenario, because belief systems are generally outside of individuals, right? They're formed because of a community, but belief systems are not entirely contained within the individual. So when the individual believes in a belief system, they are forced to accept all aspects of that belief system, and they usually pretend that they agree with all of it too, even though they may not be fully aware of the belief system itself. So when they are presented with this type of conflict, where their actions don't match certain aspects of their belief system, but they still want to hold on to their belief system itself, this is a classic example of what you would call a hypocrisy. So would anyone would like to take up on that segment, the disconnect between actions and words? Fazil, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah. There is this fear of unveiling one's belief system, and however hard we try to stick to it, we all know that belief systems in the end are subjective. So take one notion that all belief systems are equally rational. This may be scary for the fact that neither one of them is rationally, morally, and ethically correct for all standards. And this often leads to this disconnect between what you say and what you do. People may think, like as how Jordan mentioned, confirmation bias is truly a very good example of where this disconnect really arises from. And this can be dangerous because there are a lot of conspiracy theories and people who believe in false information, say to flat earthers. This belief that the earth is flat is so ingrained into their psyche that trying to disprove them compromises their entire belief system and moral codes. For fear of not destroying their beliefs or altering those highly personal systems, they continue to still contradict universal truths vigorously and spread information in an erratic manner. Some of them may know in their heart that the earth truly is round and not flat, but there is this psyche that is so vigorously, so vigorously affected that they are in this trance between their actions and beliefs. I think that is an adequate explanation.
Yes, Fazil, that explains why people tend to hold on to their belief systems regardless of vigorous proof that it's false. Now, I think we can move on to the next segment.
Right. So that was a great discussion that we had so far. And we've been brainstorming and have seen the very different dimensions of belief systems and how they've shaped us and how they've translated into a variety of actions and just colored our society and mankind itself with so many different pigments. So now in this segment, I was thinking, like, why don't we go down to the bone and deconstruct our own personal beliefs down to the T and flesh out their various intricate aspects. So Rakesh, do you think that would be a good discussion to go forward with?
Yes, definitely. That would be an amazing discussion because that's exactly what everything that we've been talking about boils down to. Personal beliefs are beliefs that we have about ourselves and the world. It is how we make sense of the world. A personal belief system acts as a filtered lens through which we navigate and understand the world. However, as we discussed earlier, these beliefs need not always be congruent with reality. They can be empowering or limiting. Empowering belief systems provide a positive outlook on life that supports personal growth. Limiting belief systems, on the other hand, do the opposite, and basically they make your life miserable. It is thus important to deconstruct your belief systems. When you deconstruct your belief systems, you're basically exposing your own belief systems. You're turning it from an invisible force that operates your actions to something that is vulnerable to scrutiny and change. So when you do that, you're more likely to hold on to your core values because they define your identity. But I think it is important to do that because then you'll be able to find out things that are not congruent with reality and you'll be more open to corrections. And I think that's why it's important to deconstruct your personal beliefs. And when you deconstruct your personal beliefs, I think you can ask a few questions like, what are your beliefs about yourself? What are your core values? What are the basic standards you have set for yourself? What is important to you in life? So on and so forth. And I think this is basically what our entire conversation boils down to, because there's a purpose that why we have been discussing all of this, right? So deconstructing your personal beliefs, I think that's the way to go to approach things.
Yeah, thank you for that very clear deconstruction of personal beliefs, Rakesh. And really, it is great that we went down this route of deconstruction because clearly it does hold a lot of gravity in this topic itself. So now that we've decided, Steve, why don't you help us garner a more clearer picture on personal beliefs and take us down all the way to the molecular level and walk us through the biological aspect of how these belief systems kind of come about?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, for asking me that question because that's something that I've done a lot of my research on in terms of personal belief systems, namely the biological aspect of it. And that comes under deconstruction, of course, because apart from why we have our belief systems, the better question would be how do we work our belief systems? How does it work in our brains? And it's really something that's beautiful because it suddenly turns from something that's philosophical to something that's more tangible, something that's biological, something that's within you. So let's start about talking. So let's answer the question actually. What is the biological stuff that goes on in our brain and that helps us construct our belief system? First of all, let's start about let's start with syndromes because that's a great way of that's a great milestone. It's a great indicator because with syndromes and with irregularities, we can easily tell what our brain and what its thought processes are not supposed to be, and then we can start pinpointing, okay, what went wrong? Why is this not happening the way it's supposed to? And when we pinpoint the reason for this syndrome, reason for this anomaly, then we can actually figure out what its purpose is in the whole chain of logical events. And so by starting with syndromes, I like to start with something that's pretty important. It's called Othello syndrome. Othello as in Shakespeare's Othello. It's a play. And the play involves delusion and jealousy. And the syndrome is named aptly so because an individual with Othello syndrome develops a very, very delusional belief that his close loved ones, especially in one very vivid case, his wife, that she was unfaithful to him. And this is the syndrome that everybody around you are unfaithful to you and you can't trust them. And we need to pinpoint where this is from, right? Because this will really answer the question, what's the biological aspect behind belief system? Because this is a belief system that people around you are not faithful to you and you need to be untrustful to them. uh, that's your belief system, and that's driven through something that's this very famous neurotransmitter, which is dopamine. um, Dopamine is something that affects your whole body in terms of increasing the likelihood of you wanting to return to do that thing again. It tells your body and it tells your brain especially that you like what you're doing right now. And this dopamine system seems to tag some person or some event as particularly important. And so in these syndromes, a particular thought process about a person or about a group of people gets tagged by this dopamine neurotransmitter as something that's important and something that you need to obsess over, be it in terms of jealousy or be it in terms of the contrary. And so this is one of the most important aspects of belief systems, wherein this pathway through this dopamine transmitter develops into a delusion about people around him. So this is Othello syndrome, where his wife may not actually be cheating on him, but he thinks she's unfaithful, and so he would not be convinced. His belief system is set in stone because he really is, the brain is hardwired into thinking that because he has this kind of because he has this kind of condition. So this would give us an insight over what the biological condition of this person is and how that is driving his belief systems, not only about himself, but about also the people around him. This kind of also calls back into when we talked about how belief systems, even if it is about you in terms of self-concept, it can affect the people around you, in a great manner. And so we can see right here that this is a personal belief, and the way this biologically works is seen, but you can also see the effects that it's having on his close ones. So with that, I think that makes sense from a biological point of view. Dopamine is released towards a particular person or a particular thing, tagging them as important. And tagging them in a way that may be obsession over their jealousy or obsession towards their unfaithfulness or whatever. It need not conform to reality, but that's what they believe. And that's what they believe because of this biological pathway.
Thank you for that really wonderful explanation, Steve, and how you went over starting with the Othello syndrome and then talking about the receptors and things like that. It really got me thinking like, whoa, the human body is really so fascinating. There's so many layers and catacombs to go through both mentally and physically. And after this really extensive deconstruction, I think we can all agree that personal beliefs are really beautiful phenomena that are created biologically and expressed in such complex ways. So now that we've gone and fleshed out personal beliefs in such a detailed manner, there are other personal beliefs as well that not only pertain to a single mind, but are common to an entire society, in fact. And there are many societal beliefs that characterize nations, and especially in our country, in India. So, Fazil, why don't you walk us through these shared belief systems and the entire hierarchy of it all?
Right. So, how do shared belief systems come about? You see these liberal states in the U.S. or even conservative states. You see these religious communities, these religions. You see congregations of people grouping together with a common belief system, right? And this all comes down to where our belief systems originate or manifest. All these changes that belief systems do to adhere to social norms show the realistic nature. They continuously evolving and changing to accommodate all these different interpretations to ensure this uniform answer to these realities that we live in. One common trend that you notice with people grouping together for a common belief system is because they may not be as individually sure of it. But when you see that people around you tend to have the same belief system, that sort of thinking is enforced, and it makes you feel more confident in thinking that your belief system is rigid enough for you to follow it. Because ultimately, what belief systems are truly determines how moralistically or rationally correct a person is. So I do think that that's how shared belief systems come about. There's not much more to it than that. But the important thing to note is seeing whether they are effective or not. See, when I talk about effective belief systems, I talk about those that are open to change, those that continuously evolve and can accommodate contradictory opinions. Because one thing that we've all discussed, with all these conspiracies that we've seen through these syndromes, all these stem from an opinion of confirmation bias. You think what you say is right, and you do not uh, look at scrutinizing opinions that go against your beliefs. So effective belief systems do not function this way and are open to analyzing contradictory opinions. Because in the end, the only solution in which we are able to reinforce our own belief systems is if we make it prone and available to all others, even accommodating opinions that may seem incongruent or contradictory. Because in this manner, we are able to deconstruct our own belief system and inculcate them with it information from a continuously evolving world. That is what I think a credible belief system must do. And it is essential that these common belief systems, communities in, say, religion or politics, are aware of the same fact as well. But then you do see these misperceptions pop up, misinterpretations rather, and all these come up from coincidental evidence, but what we must assume here is that disproving them proactively is the main issue. As I mentioned earlier, people have a very characterized fear of defending their own belief system, confirmation bias yet again. But as rational thinkers, we humans must open up our belief systems and let go of the fear of others, altering them or say something in contradiction, and stop this tendency of not hearing them out, and must realize that maybe, just maybe, our belief systems are not as consistent as we'd like them to be. And I think that really wraps up the entire session.
Yeah, that was a very justified standpoint that you had on the different components of an effective belief system. And this entire discussion, actually, it was so insightful and enlightening to see how these different belief systems arise biologically and how they're manifested into individual selves and how they coagulate with different societies. And they just characterize our entire timeline as mankind as a whole. And this was definitely a great discussion. Right. So with that, we have come to the conclusion of this podcast. We explored in great depth about the belief systems and our different perspectives on them, how they were formed, and we voyaged through the disconnect between beliefs and perceptions. We even deconstructed them all the way down to the bone and tied up this topic with a little bow on our very own personal beliefs. So we hope all you listeners will take away some insightful new information, perspectives, and hope you enjoyed this great discussion on a great topic indeed. Thank you for listening.